Welcome to the Beth Yeshua Podcast. For more episodes like this, visit bethyeshua.org/media. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Beth Yeshua Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Josh Rubenstein, and I'm here with my mom. Hi, Mom.
Hey, good to be here, Josh.
Today, we're going to talk about a variety of things. We're going to talk about what it was like for my mom to be asked by her family to officiate the funeral for her sister. I know that can be really heavy, and also I know that it was something that she also accessed some of the resources from her madricha training through the UMJC, and also asked some people and did some online research. But I thought it would be good to debrief that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Winter Leadership Conference. I just went and attended the Winter Leadership Conference for the UMJC. It was down in San Diego, sunny San Diego, and some takeaways from that. And then I thought it'd be kind of interesting. Part of what we got to do was spend some time with Russ Resnick, who is the rabbi emeritus in some ways of the entire UMJC, but he also is like the rabbinic council in an official way. And so he goes around and does rabbinic counseling with congregations and helps resolve leadership issues and structural issues and congregational splits and all kinds of things. But my wife and I got to sit down with him and his wife and have dinner, and we heard a little bit of their story, which is also a little bit of my parents' story. So that was cool. And so I thought that we also could talk a little bit about that and the fact that my mom has been asked to write a screenplay about the experience of those hippies who came to faith during that turbulent 60s and 70s, and what it was like. So she's got 100 pages. Show them the pages, buddy.
Well, actually, it's more than 100, but it's on both sides. But it's about 120 pages so far, about 60 scenes. And okay. I anticipate I have about 30 more scenes to write to finish.
And how many have you written then? How many scenes have you written?
Oh, I've written 60.
Okay.
I've written 60 scenes, which
so two-thirds done.
I think in one sense, though, it's more half done. I mean, pardon me, not half done. I would say 3/4 done, because the biggest scenes, the most important scenes have come before. So I had to set background, etc. We can talk about that.
Cool. And then, hey, as always, we'd like to remind you that you can find us on YouTube and Spotify if you want to watch this. In addition to listening to it, look for Beth Yeshua SAC, Beth, YESHUA.SAC, and that's on YouTube and Spotify. And then you also can check us out online at bethyeshua.org and see what our community is about. We're also going to probably start doing live streaming of our services again, which has been something philosophically that the elders of our community have gone back and forth on. But we kind of feel that with some people that we have in our community who are infirmed and not able to come to the services, it's a mitzvah to be able to bless them by having our services be streamed. So that's going to be fun too. So you guys can look forward to that. Find all that on our YouTube. We'll be streaming live each Shabbat. Hopefully, we'll see. We tried last week. The technology didn't quite have it, so we'll get there. Anyways, though, I wanted to talk with you, Mom, about what it was like, and I think you even shared a little bit of this maybe with Rosemary, with my wife. You shared a little bit about how in some ways it was difficult as a family member and missing your sister to have to be in a place of ministry to the rest of the family that was gathered there to honor her. Was that hard? Was it hard for you? Okay.
It was. It wasn't to the extent that it was off-putting. My sister's son, Kendon, had really tried to find somebody who was a local pastor who knew my sister. But since they have really moved from the hometown about 100 miles away and have been there for some time, the local pastors no longer knew her. And they really didn't want a stranger doing it. And they considered me to be a minister. In a sense, I mean, as a madrika, it's not like a full-blown senior minister type thing, but I am qualified to to do burial services and even marriage ceremonies. But they didn't even know that. They just felt like they wanted somebody who loved God to do this, that loved her. And so I really didn't feel that I could refuse, because I do love my sister. I do love my family. I have to say that we are seven siblings, and we all seven know and love the Lord, which is a major thing. And to me, it's an honoring to be asked. And as you said, I did some quick study. Sadly, I've been to a lot of funerals, so I started ticking off in my mind the types of things that need to occur as such a thing. But it made me feel a little detached. It made me think about how it was for you when your father died and you officiated. And not only officiated, you did a lot of the organizing for it. I didn't do much of the organizing. Her son Ken Don did, but just to officiate causes you to have to detach just a little bit to be able to be a little more objective in helping people to grieve. Really, it's a very important time to make sure we kind of tie up all the loose ends. So, for me, it felt a little distracting to me, to my own grief. In fact, that's kind of been coming this week instead. But it was really sweet. I have to say, my sister Carol, who has stayed in the community, in the general area, and stayed more connected, and is the oldest sister of the 5 girls, she really has kept tabs on everybody and knew everything, and was very, very close to Linda Kay. They had even lived together from time to time. So I really appreciated what she had to offer, and she didn't deliver a eulogy so much as she gave us a history of Linda Kay and her accomplishments and the things she had done and her connection, her love of the Lord, etc. And I felt that was extremely important. Ken Don was called upon to write the obituary for his mother. Okay. And that was tough, but extremely well done. But in general, I think it made me think more about what I'm about as a Madrika. I mean, I think when I studied, I didn't study to say, hey, I'm going to become a Madrika. It wasn't about that. I was just studying. And your dad was studying, and he was studying for Smika to be a rabbi, and I'd studied along, and I took classes even after he was gone. But it added up to being a Madrika. So I've not really thought a whole lot about that, but basically it certifies me to be a licensed teacher of more Messianic Judaism. And interestingly enough, within my family, my sister, Linda Kay, and my sister, Carol, have a great love for the Jewish people and the Jewish foundations of the faith. Without Judaism, there would be no Christianity, and some people don't even get that. But there are people in my family of 2 different ilks. One of them is some of Linda Kay's relations think that based on who her first husband was, that they themselves are Jewish, but they have no evidence of that, and certainly never
Who was her first husband? Why would they think that?
Well, his last name is Fish, and one of the daughters has researched fish. Now, I know fishers, of course, and I don't know.
But even that, like we've had this conversation.
Okay, let's
it's like,
do that. Right?
What's in a last name? Right?
I know.
Like there are all these times where people, and we talked about this extensively when we did our podcast on who gets to decide who is a Jew, right?
Right.
I feel like often when people are looking at last names, it's really kind of they're grasping at straws, the last possible straw that you can grasp at, which is like this name might be a Jewish name. And it's like, yeah, but it also might be a Gentile name. They're like, unless there are like some very distinctive names like Cohen or Levi, like there are some like really distinctive names that have been passed on that are like very, very identifiably Jewish. But even then, you're not necessarily knowing who was Jewish within that family, and whether it was the father's last name that was passed on or the mother's last name and hyphens now and all this other stuff. And
That's true.
It makes it, I think it's especially for people that for multiple generations going back, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we debrief from the winter conference, identity is so huge within our movement right now. But like if it's from multiple generations back and all they have is the potential of a name.
I know.
There's, as we've discussed before, there's no part of Jewish community that would consider that person Jewish.
Well, and then we're also looking at the fruits. We've talked about that. What is the fruit in the life of those who are kind of fighting that battle that of, well, yes, I am. Yes, I am. The interesting thing
and
for
what was
me,
the fruit? Like, what did you see?
What did I see? I see that my niece that feels that way has now married another. She has another marriage. Her first husband, they were divorced, but he is since deceased. But she has a man for a husband who has. I asked him. His last name is Snow, and I asked him. I said, "Are you Jewish?" And he said, "No, but we practice Judaism." And I said, "So, do you believe that? Then, do you believe that Jesus is that Jewish Messiah?" And he says, "Oh, no, 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 no." So,
wait, so I also don't know what that means.
So that he had
so, like,
begun,
if you asked anybody that had gotten involved with a synagogue at all,
and they're not in a synagogue.
Them,
they're not in a synagogue. They're not. They're just doing self-worship. Well, actually, it's interesting phrasing, isn't it?
Right, that is interesting phrasing, and maybe Freudian,
maybe
because that's
more to the
pretty
point.
pretty close.
Yeah.
So, like the issue is like when you're not integrated into a community, so much of Jewish life, even corporate worship, is communal based. Like there's this idea of having like the minyan, the 10 people who are Jewish together in order for a corporate worship service to be valid in the eyes of God and man, right? And so there's this idea of like you don't really stand before God individually. You're standing as part of community within Jewish life. And so it's strange. Like when they say like we're not Jewish but we're practicing Judaism. Well, it's like, well then whose Judaism are you Are you just kind of making up what you think is Judaism?
I think that was what they were saying.
GPT 4.0 version of Judaism? Like what? Whose Judaism are you practicing? Is it Orthodox, conservative, Reform, none of the above? Which then to me, that doesn't sound like Judaism at all. That sounds 100% like Hebrew roots.
It does to me too. And so that kind of increased my sadness. And I know Linda Kay and I had conversations about this, that it's really hard for her, loving the Lord as much as she loved the Lord. It was really hard for her to think that her daughter, even if they were Jewish, that would then cause her to reject the Jewish Messiah.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line here is the statement they were making to me that he was representing her, she was sitting right there when he said it, that if she ever did believe in Jesus as the Messiah, she doesn't now. And so that's a concern.
Yeah,
that's
so the interesting thing to me is that what we see frequently, and you've seen it as well as I have in Beth Yeshua's history, our community's history, is that we have people on a regular basis who are wrestling with identity confusion.
Right.
And often they will latch on to Jewish practice and Jewish identity as central importance in their life, even to the point of rejecting Messiah. Like that it is far more important for them to be recognizably Jewish, which they still wouldn't necessarily be, but in their own eyes recognizably Jewish and Jewish practicing rather than loving Messiah. And I understand, because like as soon as you jump into actual like real study of Judaism, one of the central tenets is actually the rejection of Messiah. It's the rejection of Yeshua.
Sad. Yeah.
It's idolatrous, right? It's idolatrous worship to believe that a man can be God. And for sure, it brings up some interesting theological issues.
Well, I was going to say, too, that one of the things that happened as part of what I was doing, I did a little bit of identifying myself. I mean, obviously, I'm her sister. But I also, identified myself as a Gentile believer who married a man while we were hippies who happened to be Jewish, who became a Jewish rabbi. And so I felt like I asked Ken Don and the various ones how much. I mean, I felt like it needed to at least be there in some sense because they knew some things about me and about Rabbi Rube. But and so I asked even Ken Don. I said, we talked about Mourner's Kaddish, and I said, that would be read, probably at the graveside, and I could just do that in English. It doesn't have to be any reference to Hebrew. And he said, but my mom loved the Jewish foundations of the faith. And he said, I really believe she would want you to say it in both. And I did. That was the only thing that I did, except for telling a little of our testimony, basically coming out as hippies, etc. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward. But it led to some interesting conversations. I found out later at the kind of a barbecue they had for the family that talking to various members of the more extended family, they're not really all of one mind on many things. Obviously not politics, and obviously not theology. So I thought it was interesting, and I tried to be considerate, but not condoning, of things. But
did you run into any blatant anti-Semitism?
Not blatant anti-Semitism, but more kind of nothing was said, but you could kind of look at the demeanor of people, and so there was a little bit of that, and I fully identified myself as Gentile, but the fact that I am in the Messianic movement, I think gave them pause. So, and I end up on an airplane coming back and talking to a lady who is of a sect of what they call Christianity, which is not, but she blatantly said, well, isn't God done with the Jewish people because they rejected Jesus? And I said, well, who do you think the first believers were? The question was not, can you, it was only Jews who believed that he was the Messiah. And it was people who weren't Jews who thought, well, do I have to become a Jew to get to come in? And then Paul made that clear, but I thought the whole trip had this kind of tone to it.
Wow.
But at any rate, it was a sad time. My sister's health had been declining, and she basically had a massive heart attack and died. So.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, just going back really briefly to one thing you kind of said at the beginning, that they asked you to officiate, and part of it was because you're seen as a person within your family that has a real connection to God.
Yes.
And you said all of them are strong believers, and yet they still asked you. Do they see you? Do they look up to you as a person who, maybe because of the dedicating of your life and Dad's life to ministry, is it that? What is it that makes them look at you that way?
I don't know. In one sense, I don't preach at them because, we talk. Linda Kay and I used to have amazing talks about God, and what does this mean, and what did this scripture mean? So I think it's just a respect for my loving God, and they know I've done a lot of study. Linda Kay knew I did a lot of study. That's the only thing that I can think of, but they felt that way about your dad. They really loved him as Rabbi Rube. Every time we would have a family reunion, if you can remember, they really loved for him to speak into situations. When we would have family reunions, if somebody needed baptizing, they asked your dad to do it. We'd go to the river. And remember when my Uncle Terrell was baptized?
I don't remember that, but that's interesting.
Yeah, but that they look to us, they look to me and your dad that way, and they still look to me that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I pray it's not because I come across as arrogant or anything. But
no, I don't think so. I think genuine,
when
right?
I was an English
come across
teacher,
as a person who genuinely loves God. I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that, and I know they respect me for that, and they listen. If I offer advice that I think the scripture is saying is this or that, they listen. We may have conversation, we may walk away not totally agreeing, but for the most part, they look to me as hearing from God, which puts me in a position of I need to be sure I'm hearing from God, right?
Sure. Right. There should be some
because
sobriety.
It makes me I'm very careful not to be flip about it or glib.
Yeah.
About my relationship with God, for sure.
Yeah.
Because we all know that it doesn't matter what titles we have or don't have. It's all about our own personal relationship with God. When he says, hear me, he means hear and obey. And I think many times we hear him, but we're not always quick to obey, just like our own children, right? And when we were children. So.
Sure. So if you had to kind of maybe do lessons learned, or maybe top 3 things that you kind of learned about ministering to people in a time of need, or even just top 3 things of officiating a funeral that people could take away, what would it be?
Well, I think regardless of who is the officiant, they need to do what the family wants.
Right.
They need to do what the remaining family feel is going to minister to them.
Right.
And I tried very much to do that, even to the extent of asking several of them, did they want to read the 23rd Psalm at the graveside, which is what we did, and include them, ask if they wanted to come forward and speak and say anything, which my little brother, Michael, he really wanted to say something, but he was intimidated. Plus, he had a heart procedure done about 3 or 4 weeks before that. And so he was still a little shaky. But what he did was he didn't feel comfortable there. It was a good gathering. It was about 75 to 100 people, which I thought was amazingly good with family and friends. But so what he did was during the barbecue, when it was basically just the family there, he spoke to everyone and kind of told them, because he and Linda Kay were 1 year apart, and they were as thick as thieves. They were. Every bit of trouble they got in, Michael is sure that Linda Kay led him to do it. But anyway, so I think an officiant, so doing what they want and listening for what they're saying, not forcing anything, trying to do what they want done, and kind of being objective and not putting forth what I'm thinking about my sister or our relationship, but trying to help them express themselves, I felt was probably the biggest one. And then the other takeaway I had was I didn't know they esteemed me exactly that way, and I really didn't want to fail them. I was very nervous about it. Everyone told me I certainly didn't appear nervous, but I think that we can do that. We can manage to kind of put that on another burner so we're not appearing to be nervous, but I was nervous because I didn't want to make it about me. I wanted to make it about ministering to those who've been this happened so suddenly.
Yeah.
So I would say that would pretty much be it.
Yeah. And
have you officiated a funeral?
Mm-hmm.
Which ones did you officiate?
One for the
besides your father, of course.
One for the young man that was part of our community,
of course,
who passed.
That's right. I remember that.
Helped with Evie's husband's funeral just a little bit.
That's right.
I was part of that. There was another one too.
I know. I was thinking there was a different one too, and I can't think what it was. What about that woman, Alberta, years ago? I thought you helped with that one. No. Okay.
So, like you were saying, sometimes you kind of have to pause your own processing and your own emotions. So, had you already been kind of having emotions and experiencing sadness and other things, and then when you got there, when you kind of stepped up to the bema, as it were, you just kind of okay, I've got to pause here for a moment? Or was it something where it's just it kind of came naturally to you? And I'm also kind of curious, you've come back now, like you said, you're re-entering into that mourning process. How's that going? Well,
I think before I left, as soon as I heard my sister had passed away, Ken Don himself is the one who called me. And we didn't have any mention of officiating. It was just the shock of her dying. And that night before when she was ready for bed and just clutching her chest and knowing what was going on. I think she knew what was going on, according to her husband. But so I entered grieving at that point. And of course, your mind goes to all the things you wish you had said. All I could think of was I didn't send out any kind of cards this year. And so I tried to call my siblings instead. And she's the one sibling I hadn't called. The reason being, in my mind, is because she's married, she has a support system. But I made sure I called my sisters who don't have husbands and don't have the similar, support person living with them. And it's kind of how I justified it. But she was on my radar. I'd been thinking about her for days because I owed her a phone call. So, there's always that when somebody passes. We're always thinking about what I could have, should have done that I didn't do. Yeah. So there was that. And then when he asked, I wasn't sure what he was asking at first. I thought he just wanted me to speak a few words. And then it really dawned on me what he was asking. And it was a surprise to me. And I really was praying about it, but I wasn't sure. I knew I couldn't turn it down. I think it took a lot for them to ask. Yeah. But as you say, when I went up there and was beginning to speak, there were times during the time of officiating that I would have kind of a bit of a break in my voice because I would remember something. One thing I shared that I think was poignant was when my sister Anita passed away 3 years ago, also a younger sister. I still had her message on my message machine, and I've kept it. And every now and then I have to hear that, just to remind myself of her. And I did make a comment about that, and I said, I wish I had captured Linda Kay's voice. But that, those are, some personal things like that I shared. But other than that, I pretty much tried to be, tried to not make it about me. And so coming back, I was watching something on TV. I can't even remember what it was. It wasn't that closely related, but it was something happened to a sibling, and and I began to cry. So I know that grieving still will happen. You may suppress it for a time, but it's still got to happen because we need to adjust to that idea. And for me, the wonderful thing is I know that Linda Kay loved the Lord with all her heart. She's been through many, many trials. She's been through so much, and it made her stronger in the Lord. And that was an amazing testimony.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, well, grieving is a process. I'm sure it'll continue. And
well, I was going to say this. It's a little bit of a segue, but I think one of the things that had been happening right before this was we've been so involved in the various festivals, etc., that I had not been writing on the screenplay. And I have all kinds of notes. I have all kinds of interviews written out and things and scenes, but I have been at like a stopping place. So one of the things that's happened since I've come back is I spent a couple of days really in more of a grieving process, and then I just really had to have a breakthrough with the Lord to help me move forward and get past this like a little block that was going on in terms of writing the script. And interestingly enough, the background information on people, of the kind of the 7 people that are key people, I was able to get those intertwined in a way. But I was now getting to the part where each one of them had, in their own way, come to believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, or just to believe he's the Messiah, period. Not even with reference to the fact that most of them were Jewish. And it's like I had a hurdle there. And looking at it now, I'm feeling like it was a bit of a spiritual block. I don't know what impact this movie will have, but I know.
Just so you know, we've talked about this movie, but nobody on the podcast has any idea what you're talking about. So you're going to have to back up at this point and give some background of how did this project even get started, what's even going on.
Well, what happened was I took about 10 years to write my memoir, and you actually helped me get it into print, etc. And I didn't get it out until much later, but it's been out for several years. But in the meantime, various people have read it. One person I know is a local Christian screenwriter, and she thought she might like to write it. When I went to a Christian conference, she might like to write the story. And I felt like it was a bigger story than just about my life and how I ended up getting kind of entangled with all these Jewish people who then came to the Lord, etc. But what happened was a man in New Mexico named Don Compton with Shalom Ministries had felt God sent him to the hippies of New Mexico and he not being Jewish, he didn't even know that many of these hippies were Jews, in fact, predominantly Jews. But he named his ministry Shalom, of all things, and he really reached out to all of us, to the various ones, to Eitan and to Russ and all of us, and had formed relationships, I think, with Alan Rousnitz as well, and began to help lead them to the Lord and to nurture them once they came to the Lord. So I have maintained a contact with Don Compton. We've supported his ministry all these years in a minor way, but regularly supporting. And I asked him to read the book and to write a comment on it, and he did, and he's in the book in that sense. And he contacted me about a year ago and said, or not even a year, about 8 months ago, and he said, there are a lot of filmmakers here in New Mexico, and I think there's an interest in getting this story out of the hippies of New Mexico being predominantly Jewish and coming to find their Jewish Messiah. And it looks like it could be a feature film. It looks like it could be a documentary as well. And so he said, I've got some interest in it. Will you send me 10 copies of your book? And I did. And he paid for them. I would have sent them free. He paid for them, bless his heart. So I heard almost immediately, within a month, I heard that there was a specific filmmaker in New Mexico who had shown an interest and thought he would like to make the film.
Okay.
And he's also a believer.
Wait, which version? Documentary or feature?
Well, both. That he wanted to be involved in both. But we both thought that really what we're looking at is a feature film first, which is going to be a feature film based on a true story. Not sure how that's going to come out. But then Russ Resnick is the one who suggested to him that I might want to write it. Because, I mean, all of them are writers. Eitan writes, Russ writes, I write, but none of them have written really more fiction or stories in that sense. But I don't know why, but they thought that maybe I should be the one to write it. And I considered it, and I thought I've written plays, but it's minor plays, and I've been in a lot of plays, but didn't really think about that I should be the one. And I wish I'd known how daunting it was when I took it on, but
maybe it's better you didn't know.
I think that's good. I don't know. Sometimes I stick my toe in, and then I realize how deep it really goes. Yeah. But I thought, who else could write it? It has to be somebody who's connected with the story. It has to be somebody who felt the same things, that knows the emotions of the various people, knows why they did the things they did. And I knew a lot of those things, having been part of the group. And so that's kind of how it came to be. I immediately bought about 8 books on screenwriting. Of course I did.
Yes.
and began reading. And I read this one called Save the Cat. Which...
Oh, I know that one.
Do you know that one?
I know that one.
But and I've had conversations with the filmmaker. In fact, he came to the Union's conference this last summer to kind of get a feel for Messianic Jews. The interesting thing is his last name is Jew, J-E-W. But
his last name is Jew?
Yes, but he's of Chinese ethnicity.
Okay.
And when his father immigrated to this country, they couldn't spell his name. It must be something like Chew. Yeah. And they spelled it J-E-W.
Wow.
So at first I thought, gee, that's unusual for a Jewish person to have the last name Jew. And he said, but I'm not Jewish, but he loves God. And his whole thing was, he wants the Holy Spirit to write this. And I do too. I really do too. And if he can use any of the gifts or talents or experience I've had, fine. But every time I hit a wall with it, it's a prayer moment. So at this point, I feel like, I literally, I've got a chart here. I won't show it to you right now, but I have a big chart. And I went through and I interviewed Russ Resnick. I interviewed Eitan and Connie and Jane by internet, because they're in Israel. I've interviewed other people, and I've got it all. I've got this stack. I've got this stack of interview stuff and timelines and everything that I've put together. And then my job was to kind of integrate them so that it's not like telling your dad's story in total and not telling Eitan's story and Russ's story, but it's showing how they connected in the beginning and how they're intertwined. And that's hard. That's a hard
really
thing to do.
Because they have very different stories. Because when
They
I
have
was at the
different stories.
conference just now, I was talking with Russ and Jane.
Yeah.
They couldn't even agree about parts
know,
of
I
their
heard
story.
that.
There were parts of their story where they're like, nope, that's not what happened. That actually was what happened to Ruben
and part
Shari.
of it was our story, yeah. I thought that was interesting. And
As a journalist, just really quick, sidebar.
Yeah.
Do you use Otter when you interview people? App?
I would say I don't. What is Otter?
Okay. Otter, Otter, you need to sponsor us now. But Otter is what I use with all of my journalism students, and it's like OTTR, or maybe it's ER, like the actual animal. But basically, it records the audio as you're interviewing the person, as long as you're even close, and it has an AI transcription. And so it generates the entire transcription of everything, word for word, that both of you said back and forth. And it'll even separate it if your voices are different enough. It'll separate it by speaker. So it's an incredible resource.
Yeah, okay.
So rather than having to write super, super fast or type super fast, you can actually have Otter kind of doing that heavy lifting and get the exact word for word transcript and still take your own notes.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I interviewed Russ, I interviewed him at the conference this last summer. And I was taking notes, plus we were recording it. Then he took the recording back and he put it into something, and must have been Otter.
It was something like Otter. There's a bunch of them now. There's a bunch of them.
And it italicized one of us as speakers, and the other was not italicized.
Yeah.
So they were distinct.
Pretty smart.
And every now and then it got a word wrong here or there, but, because... we don't necessarily speak distinctly all the time. But no, now there's something else that your brother, Jacob, has told me about that actually puts it, and your son, Eitan, told me about, that actually puts it into a script format.
Right.
The things that are written, which I haven't looked into. I mean, I've been putting it into script format myself, having read up on it a little bit, and I'm sure I could use a little help with that. But that's interesting. I need to make sure I'm doing that, because I didn't get to live interview Eitan and Connie being in Israel. So that's all. They said it. I sent them questions. They responded.
Got it.
And it would have been much better if I could have asked them questions as they were doing it. But and then given the fact that right about that time was October 7th, and they're in Israel, there's just been so much disruption and trauma and drama that it's, I'm amazed that we even got any information from them at all.
Yeah.
But
That's
and
an
I've interviewed
interesting
other people to
transition.
get background information. I even interviewed your brother, Jacob. He wasn't there for much of what we were doing because he was still a baby. But and I've interviewed my brother-in-law, Eric, even, to get some background on kind of the politics and things of your dad and his stepfather, et cetera.
That was one thing that Russ and Jane agreed on, was the radical politics of Dad. Like that was his whole thing. So they were, and it was interesting because there's these different classifications of hippies. We look at it from the outside, especially younger generations, as this one, everybody walking in lockstep. They were all fighting the man and stuff like that. No, but Dad was actually more fighting the man.
Yes.
Jane said, man, all I wanted to do was just go down to the Haight-Ashbury and sell strawberries to people, and it's she was really in it for the peace and the love, and just we don't have to live these frantic, hard lives. And it's interesting because both of them said something very similar. One of the things that was a wake-up call that hippie wasn't going to work was the fact that people are not inherently good.
There you go. Yes.
People are going to be selfish. It was the murder of one of the people on the commune that really shook everybody, and they realized that even though they had done this kind and nice thing, that this man had been murdered by somebody that he had been trying to be kind to, you can't. And even their own tensions, right? They were well, if the world is going to end, we're going to start our new civilization up here in the mountains of New Mexico. But they realized that they were a mess. that they
Yeah.
couldn't get along with each other.
That's
there
right.
was this brokenness inside of them that wouldn't allow peace and happiness and love and self-sacrifice. And it's so true. It's like, man, there's all these people that feel like if you just set up the right social conditions, you're going to have some sort of utopia.
Yes, yes.
And it's the same people that often believe that people are born inherently good. And
I
it's
think
really
so.
it's nurture that makes them a mess. And I'm like, man, I don't know. Like I've
No.
seen, 3-year-olds that'll lie straight to your face and like,
Oh yeah.
it's-
Remember when you came to the Lord, you were 5 years old and you recognized your sin.
right.
You recognized the level of your sin. Somebody
Right.
could look at a 5-year-old and think, "What? That's not sin." But
Right.
your heart was broken for your sin at 5 years old. And frankly, I see it I take care of your littler kids, and I see them. Your little Micah has a tender heart to the Lord. He can't bear it when he does something that's not okay. He so feels it so deeply. I was going to say that this whole thing about being inherently good was kind of what drove me to that style, drove me to drop out of teaching high school English to join in to find a group like this, was I thought that even the school systems didn't reflect any belief that we are inherently good and inherently want to learn. Because I thought people, if you just leave children alone, what are they going to do? They're going to play with that bug that's crawling toward that flower. They're going to look at the flower. I mean, I had this general sense, and this place in England called Summerhill, they had created a school system where they kind of just followed the kids on what the kids wanted to learn. And when I left teaching, I left to join in with other teachers who had dropped out to form a free school, quote unquote, in the mountains of California by Santa Cruz. And so for me, it was that same kind of belief that if you just leave people alone, they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
And I think about even the guy who, I won't say his name, but the guy who ended up getting killed. They had been on a 100-mile trek taking burros from one commune to another. And they encountered this guy at a hot springs. And he was essentially hitchhiking. And they said, "Sure, come on." And he hitchhiked. And they took him back to Stone Mountain in New Mexico. And I had to kind of create the scene that led to the murder, but I think it might be actually kind of true. But he was a very selfish person, only looking to himself, really wanting the vehicle, probably even wanting the gun. He ended up taking the gun too, is my memory. But totally all about self, every single time. But the man who got killed had himself had an encounter on one of the communes where he had shot and killed somebody's cat. For whatever reason, just shot and killed the owner's cat. So that commune, they wanted him gone. So many levels of the real nature coming out. And I think that is exactly what hit it. And I think Jane describes a moment when the two boys are sick. It's after the guy's funeral. She has been invited to one of the communes to get vegetables that she can then go home and put up for the winter. And she does that, and she's hitchhiking for everything and doing everything, and she just becomes broken. And she starts praying to God to get her back home again. And that's when she meets that busload of Jesus freaks who lead her to the Lord.
And she said, she told us when we were having dinner with them, it was their kindness. She said,
Yeah,
they took her and her two little boys into the bus.
that's right.
The boys were hungry and exhausted. She was exhausted. They recognized that she was just absolutely, and I think the kids were maybe sick. And so
I
they
think they were
literally,
sick.
they like led her to a back area, let her lay down. Nobody
Yes.
bothered her. They
Took care of the
will take care of
children.
the kids. They gave the kids food and water
Yes.
and like took care of everybody. And it's that reality that really only can be done by an internal transformation, which I think is the most essential working of God
Exactly.
in our lives, to change what we desire. And I think, I was having a conversation with a student recently, and he said, I've been talking to a lot of people, and they feel like their early 20s and 30s was like the best time of their life. And he's like, what about you? What do you feel like was the best time of your life? It was a really deep conversation. He's a really deep kid.
I bet I can name that child, but I won't.
No, it wasn't one of mine.
One of your
school.
students. I know your students having sub for you. I know some of your students.
Oh, no, he actually is this guy. He just visits my class because we get into deep conversations. So he's actually not enrolled in one of the classes.
All right.
His name is Honored. He's a really great kid. And I said, actually, you know what? I really like where I'm at right now. Like, I've learned a lot and I've gone through a lot of pain, and I realize that it's not all about me, and I realize that I mean, maybe I could wish for the health and the vitality that I felt when I was in my 20s and 30s, but if I had to give up this mindset of the transformation that God has done in my life, I wouldn't want to give that up. Like, I'd much rather have that transformation and be who I am right now. And I think about that when it comes to like relationship with God. You know, there's a lot of people that bring their own works into their relationship with God. Like, it's like God is this bar that I have to meet. And so like, I'm going to just do better and do better and do better until I get to this bar. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people come into our community, I think, and they want the halakha. They want like, what is it that we're all supposed to be doing? How should I dress? What should I eat? What words can I say? What words can I not say? What activities am I allowed to do? And like, they want like the boxes for them to live inside of and feel that they have done all of the things. And I refuse to give anybody a list, because that's not the way God works in our life.
Exactly.
And actually, the very thing that you might be very good at might be inside the box that I would give to you. And that's not what God needs to work out in your life at all. God might need to work out something that's like very, very different about like your own issues and your own brokenness, right? And you would never lean
and your
into
relationships.
That stuff.
I mean, it really comes down to even your relationships with other people.
Yeah, but my
you
point
treat
is
your
that
fellow man. Yeah.
the Holy Spirit transforms each one of us completely uniquely. And so instead of like, I've got to get up to the bar, it's like God is like, actually, no, I'm already here with you. So let's like dig into the mess of where you are, and let's get you sorted out. And anyways, that's what I was so impressed by, was they were struck at some point in their hippie experience by the fact that this was not the answer. That there was not going to be a transformation of society simply by a bunch of people wanting to be good. That they couldn't be good enough. That it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work. And I was like, man, I wish more people would get that through their thick skulls. Even like, I mean, I don't care where people are about their politics, but like, so many people are like, they're waiting for the right politician to come along and fix everything. And I'm like,
it's like a savior thing.
Are you paying
it's a
attention?
Savior.
It's that weird Messiah thing. It's like, no, like every single one of these people is a broken human. Every single one of them has issues. And it's interesting because, you know, I was talking with my kids about this, that I don't necessarily believe that any king is divinely given, nor much less any politician divinely given. Like, I don't think that any of them have a divine commission from God. Because having a king was an act of rebellion by the people of God.
That's right.
It was seen as direct rebellion. They demanded a king, and God was like, hey, guess what a king is going to do? He's going to take your daughters, he's going to take your money, he's going to take your best horses, he's going to take the best land, he's going to take the best of the food, he's going to take all of these things from you. And what you'll get in return is what? Like some broken guy to tell you when it's time to go to war? You know, and it's like
God,
the
Wizard of Oz, the image versus what was behind the screen.
Totally, right? And what's behind the screen is just a broken dude that's trying to get home also. And it's so wild to me that we haven't figured this out, that we keep like in this cyclical reality, we keep thinking that somebody is going to be the next Messiah around the corner, is going to fix all the things. And like, it's the reason why there's not going to be peace, you know, because of whoever gets, you know, elected as prime minister of Israel, or whoever,
or president of the United States,
right? Or whoever the Palestinians choose as their next Hamas leader or whatever, like, or that's really not decided by the people in any way. But like, there's no way that any of that peace is going to be orchestrated. And it's interesting too, I was talking with I'm not even going to say her name. She's a very influential person within Messianic Judaism who has deep connections within the government of Israel because of the work that she's doing, and even the UN. And I asked her, what do you think about this peace settlement? The releasing of the hostages and the releasing of the hostages on the other side. And she said, I'm just going to be blunt. It's a crap sandwich. It's an absolute disaster. Because the way that the deal is structured and the way that Israel was forced into it. And I was like, what? Israel was forced into it? She said, yeah. Trump's premier negotiator came to Israel and demanded to see Bibi Netanyahu on Shabbat, and while he was recovering from a surgery, by the way, and said, you need to accept this deal. You need to accept the ceasefire deal. Trump wants peace. And the person, and Bibi was like, but this is a bad deal. Like, I mean, I don't know if you've read through all of it. I haven't even read through all of it, but she said one of the stipulations is that every single terrorist will be released. Every single terrorist that they've captured will be released. And I mean, these are people that have sworn to kill the Jewish people, and they will be released. And many of them actually live in Israel. There are known terrorists that were captured after October 7th attacks who were living in Israel. And those people will be released back out into the public in Israel. And she said, imagine, like, in the United States, we have a registry where sex offenders have to, like, you know, you have to know where they live, right? So you can protect your family. Imagine if there was a person who was an actual terrorist who wanted to kill your family, but you had no idea that they were living next door to you.
Wow.
And imagine that times hundreds. Hundreds. And so, in addition to that, so that's like, in order for them to release any of the male hostages, they will have to release all of these terrorists back into the populace. It's really wild. It's wild. And she said,
what kind of time frame is it?
Right. And she said to me, Josh, what did you think was going to happen after October 7th? And I said, I thought honestly that Israel was going to utterly wipe the Palestinian territories off the face of the earth. That they were just going to absolutely wipe them out. That there was going to be like, we're going to destroy every tunnel, we're going to kill every Hamas person, and we're going to kill them all so that this can't ever come back and be a plague against our people ever again. And she said, many of us thought that. And she said, and we would still be pursuing it. Like, we know the hostages will not come back alive through military intervention. We know that because every single one of them, every time they get close to them in the tunnels, they're being executed while the soldiers are like 50 yards away that would rescue them. The only ones that they've ever been able to rescue were the ones that were above ground, being held in safe houses by people who supposedly are journalists. And so, like, all of those ones...
How did these first three come out?
That's part of the peace deal. Part of the peace deal.
I know, but I mean, I'm surprised that they came back.
They just release them. They release them, and we release X amount of terrorists. And we also obviously are not going into the tunnels anymore and executing the leaders of Hamas and doing the other things that we were doing and taking them out. Anyways, so like this whole thing is just like, what a broken world. And I understand why the hippies wanted to, like, hey, let's start over, man. This is a broken place. Like, I get that. But like, it is, like you said, like, if you leave a bunch of kids on their own, you know, you're going to have Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
And I mean, like, why do we think that, like, the experience is going to be any different because we structure it X, Y, Z? In fact, the only places where there's been, like, real radical breakthrough in education is actually the exact opposite. It's extreme structure. I don't know if you've heard about this woman.
No, man. What is it?
She's in Great Britain. Everybody hates her. Like all of the liberal people in Great Britain hate her because she took a public school that, like, does not get to choose its students. These are public schools, and it's a public school in an inner city, and she has completely given them this, like, structure. Like, people don't talk in the halls. Your utter attention is on the teacher at every moment. She demands of her teachers a level of, like, active, like, questioning and all of this other stuff that's going on in all the classrooms. It's just like, fine-tuned, and like
Sounds like the Socratic method too. Yeah.
it's a little bit like it. But anyways, like they are outperforming every other school in all of Great Britain. And these are some of the students that, quote unquote, would never succeed. These are some of the students that they're from the lowest poverty demographics. They're from like recent immigrant families, so like a lot of these families, their lives are radically shifting because of this. And it's like liberal white people in Britain telling them, this isn't real success. We need to shut you down. And it's all of these recent immigrant families who are saying, please don't shut this down. This is changing the lives of our children and the family destiny. Like, what are you doing? So it's this
But I think the
thing.
kids in that said situation start to feel good about themselves, because it's like an infant when you get a baby, a brand new baby, and you take their clothes off to give them a bath. They're freaked out. Their little arms are flailing. And what do? You hold them in. You hold them in because they need a certain kind of security and structure. And people have thought that that's real freedom. Just let them do whatever they want. Let them choose whatever they want. And they're getting the opposite. Also in this country, in the educational system, that's what has proven to be the best solution, is give them some really good, strong parameters for what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And you do have discussions about it, but you don't have it at the moment of obedience. You
That's
have
right.
those discussions at that level where everybody talks about, well, was that okay? But structure is how we were all created. You get back to who we are. We are not inherently good. We are all seeking our own pleasures, etc. And we don't want structure, but yet we do.
Right.
We don't do well when we're floundering. We do not do well. We do our best when there is a structure that holds us in. But you've got to trust those people who are creating that they are then not
It's
going
hard.
to substitute their power over you. And I think that's one of the fears is, what are they doing to the kids? Are they little robots, whatever? No. But I think when you see those kids, you're going to see those kids have integrity. And I've seen kids that have structure and they have integrity. And it's a whole different thing.
It is.
It's a whole different thing. They are not coming at it from a selfish standpoint. They're looking at the greater good, whether they thought they would or not. But it's kind of been part of how they've been nurtured. So,
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we kind of went down a different path
interesting.
than I had in mind. One of the things that, and maybe we can pick this up in another podcast, but one of the things that was really interesting to me was Rabbi Glebe, who we interviewed, and I would encourage people to go back and listen to that interview. It's kind of a two-parter because of technical difficulties, but he got up and gave a presentation on the disenfranchisement of the young people within the movement. And what it is that's causing them to really disconnect. Because he spends a lot of time working with youth. That's one of the main thrusts of their community in general. And they have a lot of special events that they do with youth in particular. And, it reminded me so much of our conversation with him, of this weird lack of clarity of identity. What is Messianic Judaism? He actually brought up a study by this woman who actually began studying Messianic Judaism. And she said, Messianic Judaism, as it exists within most communities, where you only have 30% of the people, if that, who are actually Jewish, and most of those tend to be the leaders that are older, who were part of that original movement from the 60s and 70s, right? That is basically, it's evangelical Christianity. You've got 70% evangelical Christians in the room. She said, if you look at where most of the people come from already they were in an evangelical Christian church.
Right.
And so that 70% of non-Jewish people that are part of the movement are not really there for the reality of Messianic Judaism. So she says, you can't call this a Jewish movement at all.
Interesting.
Until you actually really start to deal with that reality of who's in the room and the fact that it's overwhelmingly not Jews.
And it's
so,
overwhelmingly older people.
correct.
That's
yeah,
interesting,
and Rabbi
too.
Glebe brought up, he was like, hey, there's a reason why if you look around this room right now, there's like 5 people that are under the age of 40 that are leaders. That whole generation has kind of said no thank you to Messianic Judaism. And he's Gen X like me. So he's, and we're very, he and I are pretty rare. You don't find a lot of 50-year-olds who are part of the Messianic movement. It's just not really there. And so it was really a fascinating thing.
Interesting.
It was, I think some people were upset by it. In fact, Dr. Seif, or Seif?
I never can pronounce his name. I need to just learn it.
Dr. Seif. We'll call him Dr. Seif.
Okay.
Apologies, Dr. Seif. I don't think you'll ever watch this. I don't know who's ever watching this. But,
I don't either.
but he got up and he said, hey, for my part, I just want to make it clear as the president of not as the president, but as the, he's in
executive director.
Executive director. As executive director of the union, Gentiles will always be welcome within the union. And Rabbi Stuart Dowerman got up after him and said, hold on a second. That's not what Rabbi Glebe was saying. Rabbi Glebe was not saying, let's get rid of the Gentiles. He said, we need to look at the reason why Gentiles are in our movement, and we need to look at the fact that we are not bringing more Jewish people into our movement. Those are the primary things that he's really talking about, and both of those have profound implications for the future of what Messianic Judaism actually will be.
Absolutely.
If you don't have Gentiles in the room for the right reasons, and often, and he went through a bunch of the wrong reasons, like people who basically want to be Jewish, people who believe that Judaism is a more pure and holy religion, people who believe that they're basically, they're Sabbatarians. They believe that the church is worshiping on the wrong day. People who believe that we should be celebrating only the feasts and festivals that are in the Bible, and we should be celebrating no other things, right? If you're in it for those reasons, that's the wrong reasons. And you're actually in this for you rather than for what God is actually doing with Messianic Judaism. And it was, and so it's interesting because I receive emails on a regular basis. We have our website doesn't have our address. People have to ask for permission to come. It's this thing. And people are like, how dare you? That's not very seeker friendly of you. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not very seeker friendly because I don't want to waylay people and I don't want to be waylaid. But I receive emails from people on a regular basis who are interested in coming. And it's so obvious, the ones that are completely self-focused. They immediately tell me about how long they've been studying Torah, or they tell me about somebody from 4 generations ago in their family, or they tell me why they believe that the church is apostate, or they tell me why we should only be celebrating on Saturdays, or blah blah blah. And none of them mention a love for the Jewish people, a desire for Jewish people to come to know Messiah, a restoration of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and a building back up, all of the prophecies that are actually there in the Bible about the nations specifically helping the Jewish people with that restoration. They don't mention any of those things. And the people, the 2% of people that write me the other kind of email I just have this profound love for the Jewish people. And I don't know why. And I'm really wondering what God's doing with that. And it's come on by.
Come and find out.
Come and find out. Come and find out. And it's weird to think that we have to be gatekeepers in this day and age. But I also feel we're doing nobody any favors if we're not. And I know nobody wants to be the police and decide who should come in and who should stay and all this other stuff. And I know it starts to feel spiritually very weird. But man, if we don't be deliberate about these things, other people are being very deliberate and going after what they want. And so if you're not going to be intentional and go after what you believe God has called Messianic Judaism to be, it's not going to happen on accident. We've seen that there's this real spiritual battle for Messianic Judaism. And it is not going to happen on accident. And we're going to have to be very deliberate and intentional about it.
Well, just in working with the children at at our congregation, I see that there are really only 2 families there with children that are Jewish.
Right.
And that's a little frustrating. And the youngest child there that is Jewish is 6 years old. And so I was just realizing we don't really even have a toddler program. We have a toddler coming up who's not Jewish. We'll still have a program, to help that child, but because I feel like the parents of that child are right-hearted and have love the Jewish people. But at any rate,
it puts us into a real philosophical conundrum.
Yeah,
because
it is.
we are one of those families that has Jewish children there.
That's
and
right.
There's not a lot of other children there. And so just that experience of being around other people that love God and love Messiah and are excited and have that, just even on a faith in Messiah level, we don't have much of it. Much less, my kids don't know other Jewish kids who love Jesus.
That's right. They don't. And even your daughter, who is in a Christian college, just recently was telling me how she was interviewed by one of the others who said, "What is Messianic Judaism? What is that?" It was like it was some other different religion. Right. And didn't even have any knowledge of what was going on with the Jewish people. It didn't even understand that the hostages meant anything, from October 7th, et cetera. But
our bell is about to ring here.
I know.
So we got to wrap up.
I know.
Because I think our bell is going to ring very, very, very soon. We've kind of scratched the surface of a bunch of things that we could go into for discussion. But I think we'll just have to kind of decide where we take it from here.
Okay.
But thanks, Mom.
Really, thanks for
really
debriefing from the conference. I really appreciate hearing about the conference. That was good.
Yeah, and there's more. There was other things that were presented. I don't know. I'll just
more.
This is my parting shot. My parting shot is we need a real rejuvenation of vision and passion that can only come from the Holy Spirit.
Thank you. Yes.
I don't care whether or not you're in the MJAA, which is more outward manifestations of the gifts of the Spirit, or if you're in the UMJC, which is more scholarly or whatever. That's the stereotypes for both of those organizations. Because I don't see either organization being incredibly intentional. And man, it's so hard to be lit on fire when you're the only Jewish family in your community, or one of the 2 or 3 that actually is, with younger kids, I mean. And it's really
frankly,
hard.
The other family is a mixed marriage too, which is another issue that we've tried to address. To try to help those folks, Right,
and how to fully celebrate all that part of who they are. So, well, thanks, Mom. We should wrap up. I'm so sorry we gotta go, but this is a good conversation. And I'll see you later tonight for Shabbat dinner. You coming?
I guess so, because Rosie just texted and broke through.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right. So, we want you to come. We're having grilled cilantro chicken, which is delicious.
Ooh, one of my favorites.
I think you'll love it. So, all right. Well, thank you, Mom. And to everybody out there, if you want more information about our community, go to bethyeshua.org. Thank you for being with us. Feel free to shoot an email through our website if you have any questions. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can always visit bethyeshua.org for more.